کنفرانس اعضای کنگره آمریکا از هر دو حزب در واشنگتن به مناسبت سالگرد انقلاب ضدسلطنتی، نه به دیکتاتوری شاه، نه به استبداد مذهبی، آری به جمهوری دموکراتیک. جمعه 22 بهمن 1400.
سخنرانیها و پیام‌های 50 تن از اعضای کنگره در حمایت از یک ایران آزاد، جمهوری دموکراتیک و مبتنی بر جدائی دین از دولت، با شرکت ایرانیان از 40 ایالت آمریکا.
گزیده سخنرانیهای لافگرین، براد شرمن، شیلا جکسون لی، دان بیکن، اسکات پری، راجا کرشنامورتی، برایان فیتزپاتریک، استیو وومک، جو ویلسون و اسکات پیتر. قسمت دوم.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barad, Chair of OIAC's Advisory Board, and welcome to our first congressional briefing in 2022.
Yes, good morning. My name is Majid Salashpour. I'm the Political Director for Organization of Iranian American Communities. I would like to welcome Iranian American community leaders from across 40 states in the country. And let me also welcome the media, especially those who are broadcasting our event live into Iran.
Yes, today marks Iran's anniversary of 1979 anti-dictatorial revolution. Shah's regime prosecuted and killed the nationalists, intellectual leaders, and democratic forces, and that empowered the network of the fundamentalist mullahs to pocket the leadership of a genuine revolution. The Ayatollahs hijacked the revolution 43 years ago, but the struggle lives on, and the torch is now shared by 3 generations of Iranians with the resistant units on the forefront. People of Iran are struggling for a secular republic because they have rejected the single-party dictatorship of the Shah and the ruthless theocracy of the mullah. Both the mullahs and the Shah are responsible for waves of massacres, executions, arrests, and torture of political prisoners. The September 1978 Black Friday massacre in Tehran's Jaleh Square took place on Shah's watch. The 1988 massacre took place under the mullah's watch, and Ebrahim Ra'isi, the selected president of Supreme Leader, is directly responsible for the killing of 30,000 political prisoners that summer.
Absolutely, and yet neither the Shah nor the mullahs succeeded in ending the desire of the Iranian people for secular democratic republic. Instead, people's aspiration to establish a democratic multi-party republic is even stronger today. This is evident in 8 major nationwide uprisings over the past 4 years. That is precisely why Organization of Iranian American Communities is proud to continue its advocacy and supports Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan for a free Iran. This briefing is also very timely because as we speak, Washington and others are still searching for an Iran policy that works. As for us, our community members, the people in Iran are our cue. We take our cues from the Iranian people, are always reminded of their chants of neither crown nor turban, the clerics must go. The Iranian people, their resistance, and indeed the United States Congress have already told us what the framework of such a sound and good US policy should be. So today, we'll hear from some 50 bipartisan members of Congress.
That's right. And these public officials are representing millions of Americans from both parties, Republicans and Democrats, and will be joining us to offer their insight and policy recommendation. Throughout our program, we will also...
براد شرمن. سابقه نقض حقوق بشر توسط رئیسی حتی بدتر از اسلافش بوده است. امروز می‌دانیم بیش از 30,000 زندانی سیاسی قربانی این جنایت‌ها شدند، زیرا آنها از آرمان یک ایران آزاد حمایت کردند.
I'm pleased to join the Organization of Iranian American Communities to commemorate the anniversary of Iran's 1979 revolution. The revolution may have started with talk of democracy, but will ultimately force the Iranian people to live under an autocratic and corrupt regime that targets its own people and is the chief state sponsor of international terrorism from Syria to Lebanon to Gaza to Europe and South America and across the globe. We have often heard this story firsthand from our neighbors in Los Angeles, the Iranian American community, particularly the San Fernando Valley, many of whom fled to escape the repression of this regime. Despite originating humanity's very first human rights document, the Cyrus Cylinder, the Iranian people have faced abysmal human rights conditions since this day, 43 years ago. The world should not forget the mass murders carried out by the Iranian regime in 1988. Khomeini issued the bloody order to, quote, annihilate the enemies of Islam immediately. Executions of thousands continued for months, with hundreds of people hanged each and every day before being buried in a mass, unmarked grave. Today, we know that as many as 30,000 political prisoners had their lives taken from them, taken because they supported the dream of a free Iran. President Ra'isi, his human rights record has been even worse than his predecessors, with executions rising dramatically. According to Amnesty International, Iran is the most prolific user of capital punishment in the region and second worldwide only after China. For too long, the Iranian people have been deprived of their fundamental freedoms, for which reason they rejected dictatorship in 1979 and oppose religious tyranny today. And that's why I became the chief sponsor of House Resolution 118, expressing support for the Iranian people's desire for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear republic of Iran, and condemning violations of human rights and state-sponsored terrorism by the current Iranian regime. I have long been dedicated to helping those who are trying to achieve democracy in Iran. For example, back in 2019, before this epidemic, I spoke at the Free Iran rally outside the State Department to express my solidarity with the brave Iranians protesting for a new chapter in Iran's history. 1,500 of those protesters were killed during the 2 weeks of unrest, and thousands more were detained and subjected to widespread torture, including beatings, floggings, electric shocks, sexual violence, forced administration of chemical substances, and the deprivation of medical care. Last Congress, I supported and helped pass through the House Resolution 752, supporting the rights of the people of Iran to free expression, condemning the Iranian regime for its crackdown on legitimate protests. In this Congress, I have co-sponsored H Resolution 497 and H Resolution 744, which condemn Iran's state-sponsored persecution of the LGBTQ plus community and of religious minorities such as the Baha'i. As long as I am in Congress, I will continue to fight for the dream of a free, democratic Iran. Thank you for standing with me to move toward that dream.
دان بیکن، عضو کمیته نیروهای مسلح کنگره آمریکا. ایالات متحده باید درباره قتل عام مخالفان ایرانی تحقیق کند و مقامات رژیم ایران را پاسخگو بداند. رئیسی باید پاسخگوی جنایاتش علیه بشریت باشد.
For over 40 years, the Iranian people fought for fundamental freedoms and have rejected a monarchic dictatorship and a religious autocracy. In recent years, protests hostile to the Iranian regime spread like wildfire, reaching 100 cities across the nation. Regrettably, lethal force was used by Iranian security forces, killing an estimated 1,500 fellow citizens. The Iranian regime is in constant violation of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 1988, the Iranian regime killed their own due to differing viewpoints. In 1999, 2009, and 2017, political protests were held and Iranian citizens' voices were violently silenced by the regime. It is my belief that it should be the policy of the United States to investigate and hold Iranian officials accountable for the extrajudicial killings of Iranian dissidents. To those who continue holding legitimate and peaceful demonstrations against an oppressive and corrupt regime, I commend and support you. Your bravery and commitment to standing strong against a tyrannical regime gives hope to all. Under the United Nations, Iranian citizens are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When any government seeks to destroy and strip those rights away from you, it is within your right to peacefully demonstrate and regain your freedoms. We should always be fighting for a republic, non-nuclear, and secular Iran. I will continue to work with my colleagues on the House Armed Services Committee and other members of Congress to push for an investigation into the disgraceful actions of Ra'isi and his involvement in the 1988 massacre. He must be held accountable for crimes against humanity. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you all today.
شیلا جکسون لی، مردم ایران که در سال 1357 علیه دیکتاتوری به پا خواستند تا به دموکراسی برسند، الان هم برای رسیدن به آزادی و دموکراسی می جنگند.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I represent the 18th Congressional District in Texas, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of the House Resolution 118, the resolution that focuses on the absolute necessity for democracy in Iran. It is so very important to promote the people who love democracy. And in this anniversary of the 1979 popular anti-dictatorial revolution, where people stood up to be able to fight for democracy, we want to say that it is important to receive that democracy and to be able to speak against the massacre of 1988, the political prisoners, the suppression of peaceful demonstrations in 1999 and 2009, 2017 and 2019. When does it ever end? It is when good people say something. And for far too long, Iran and the people have suffered from the lack of fundamental freedoms, but they're fighting for their freedoms. Iranians deserve the right to vote and to be confident that there is a democracy for them and their families. That is what we stand here and support. We want a peaceful Iran, and we're calling now for democratic, secular, non-nuclear Iran. We want a democratic Iran where the ballot box is important and as well social justice is lifted up. So I want to thank you for having me, because all the years that I've had the privilege of knowing Iranian Americans, I've known their fight for freedom, their fight for a democratic Iran, and their fight for their families, and for the suppressed to be relieved, and for the prisoners that are peaceful and only want democracy to be freed. And so, as the last month, we honored Dr. Martin Luther King, someone that I've always studied. He had these words, why we can't wait for democracy and justice. And he also had these words, and I remind you of them. The arc of the moral universe bends long, but it bends toward justice. And our dear friend, Representative John R. Lewis said, never give up, never give in, and never give out. Democracy now, democracy forever. Thank you.
اسکات پری. مردم ایران در سال 1979 برای پایان دادن به دیکتاتوری تک حزبی شاه به پا خواستند، اما آن حکومت با دیکتاتوری مذهبی آخوندها جایگزین شد.
Just taking a moment to acknowledge what happened in 1979, I remember well the Iranian revolution for freedom. They wanted to throw off the chains of one-party rule where they could actually choose their leadership and who oversaw their country and who governed it. Of course, it didn't work out the way that they had hoped it would, and we know the American story as well involved with Iran. But at this time, it's important to acknowledge that the revolution was about freedom for the Iranian people, and they still want that. And so at this time, they want to have a secular government. They want a government where they can choose their leaders, where they can be free to practice the religion they want as opposed to living under a theocracy. So all this time later, let's just renew the spirit of that revolution. And if it's time to throw off that theocracy, let's not forget that. So we wish God's blessings on the people of Iran who yearn to breathe free and to renew their faith in their fight for freedom.
برایان فیتزپاتریک. متعهد می‌شوم ایالات متحده در به رسمیت شناختن حقوق مردم ایران و مبارزه آنها برای ایجاد یک نظام دموکراتیک مبتنی بر جدائی دین و دولت و جمهوری غیر هسته‌ای ایران ثابت قدم بماند.
And February marks the anniversary of Iran's 1979 revolution, which saw the end of a monarchical dictatorship and the beginning of the repressive Islamic Republic. During this month, Iranian American communities across the nation recommit themselves to the causes that prompted this historic revolution: freedom, democracy, independence, and social justice. Iranians deserve the right to choose their own future. Now more than ever, it is critical that we continue to support the democratic aspirations of the people of Iran that have been denied for so long. And in doing so, we must condemn the Iranian regime's human rights abuses against dissidents and minorities and stand with the people of Iran who continue to hold legitimate and peaceful protests against the oppressive and corrupt regime. This Congress, I joined 249 bipartisan colleagues in co-sponsoring House Resolution 118, which expresses this sentiment and emphasizes the importance of democracy, human rights, and holding human rights abusers in Iran accountable. As the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe, Energy, and the Environment and Cyber, I remain committed to ensuring the United States stand in support of recognizing the rights of the Iranian people and their struggle to establish a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Iranian republic.
راجا کریشنامورتی. ما به دیکتاتوری تک حزبی شاه و به دیکتاتوری مذهبی آخوندها نه میگوییم و به دموکراسی و حکومت جمهوری آری میگوییم.
Hi everybody, I'm Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy of the 8th District of Illinois. Today we commemorate the anniversary of the 1979 revolution for freedom in Iran. We say no to Shah's single-party dictatorship, no to mullah's theocracy, and yes to democracy and a republican form of government. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of House Resolution 118 to express support for the Iranian people's desire for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran. And I support the resolution's condemnation of violations of human rights and state-sponsored terrorism by the Iranian government. Democracy is a gift and a blessing that I wish for the citizens of Iran. I hope that gift is closer within reach this coming year. Thank you again for allowing me to virtually greet you, and I wish to be with you in person next time. In the meantime, please be well.
استیو وومک: ما از مردم ایران و تلاش آنها برای دموکراسی و پاسخگو کردن رژیم ایران حمایت می‌کنیم.
Hello, I'm Congressman Steve Womack, representing the 3rd District of Arkansas. A government earns its legitimacy from the people it governs. We all know that authoritarians who put their own interests ahead of their country will never hold power forever. It's critical that we separate Iran's governing authorities from the Iranian people, most of whom crave basic human freedoms. The Iranian people recognize the massive fraud perpetrated on them by their rogue leaders. With a decimated economy and suppression of human rights, the Iranian regime continues to ignore domestic priorities. Instead, they're duly focused on oppressing their citizens, funding terror, ballistic missile testing, and the development of their nuclear program. This blatant disregard for the well-being of their citizens shows Iran's rulers for what they are: tyrants enriching themselves and expanding their power at the expense of the people they govern. It's why I proudly support HRES 118 and legislative proposals that stand against the oppressive rule and aggressive behavior of the mullahs. To all those watching, we support the Iranian people in their pursuit of democracy and holding the Iranian regime accountable for its many abuses. Thank you for all you do to confront this corrupt regime and support the Iranian people who are dedicated to creating a true republic.
جو ویلسون: بسیار خوشحالم که قانون حقوق بشر برای بازخواست رژیم ایران به خاطر نقض فاحش حقوق بشر را در این کنگره معرفی کردم.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the people of Iran, on this anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, I am grateful to address the Iranian American community, which remains as dedicated to the cause of democracy and freedom from the tyrannical theocratic oppression. I was grateful to introduce the Iran Human Rights and Accountability Act this Congress on the eve of Nowruz, which would hold the Iranian officials accountable for gross violations of human rights against the Iranian people. Iranians deserve to live in peace with self-determination. We will not forget these dissidents who were abused or killed at the hands of the regime. And we stand with those in pursuit of a secular democratic Iran to recover and relive the glory of what has been an extraordinary part of a Western civilization, which is the culture of Persia. God bless.
لافگرین، رئیس کمیته مدیریت کنگره: برای کنگره مهم است اذعان کند نقض حقوق بشر مردم ایران غیر قابل قبول است و سرکوب مداوم اعتراضات در ایران باید پایان یابد.
I certainly appreciate the invitation from the Iranian American community of Northern California to speak with you during your Free Iran conference this year. I also appreciate your ongoing advocacy for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Iran. I stand with you in strong opposition to the Iranian government's promotion of terrorist activities and its violation of human rights. As you know, at the end of 2019, the Iranian people courageously rose up and exercised their fundamental freedoms. In response, the Iranian government subjected these peaceful protesters to violence and lethal force. In the House of Representatives, I have co-sponsored H-Res 118, which condemns the Iranian regime's human rights abuses. It's important for Congress to acknowledge that these rights violations are unacceptable and that the continual crackdown of peaceful protests in Iran must end. Together, we must promote peace and democracy.
اسکات پیترز. از سال 1979 مردم ایران برای زندگی در یک جمهوری دموکراتیک مبتنی بر جدایی دین و دولت و غیر هسته‌ای، فارغ از ظلم و ستم پادشاهان و دیکتاتورها و افراطگرایان مذهبی جنگیدند.
Since 1979, the Iranian people have yearned for the opportunity to live in a democratic, secular, non-nuclear republic free from oppression by kings, dictators, and religious extremists. Men, women, children, Kurds, Baha'i, Christians, Jews, and Muslims have all suffered for decades at the hands of an oppressive regime solely focused on maintaining absolute power rather than helping the Iranian people. Abuse and torture are common occurrences as security forces attempt to silence those speaking out for democracy and equal rights. I'm here today to stand with the Iranian people and condemn the heinous acts of the Iranian government in the strongest of terms. Persia, as Iran was formerly known, is home to one of the world's oldest civilizations. For thousands of years, it was a center for art, literature, philosophy, and innovation. We must support the Iranian people as they fight for a prosperous future that reflects their prosperous past. I will continue to call out human rights violations and state-sponsored terrorism. I will also support policies that create an atmosphere in which all Iranians can succeed regardless of gender, religion, or personal background. By doing so, we can honor the legacy and hard work of generations past as we work to build a better future. I hope you'll join me by saying yes to democracy and yes to an independent republic. Thank you.